Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video is featuring some products from Altenew, and we are exploring how just simply changing up our color palette just a little bit can totally change the mood of our cards. So this is a super simple stenciled project, but you can see just by making a couple of tweaks from the colors that it really does give a different kind of feel. The first card has more of like a morning spring vibe, where the second card has more of like a twilight evening vibe, and those things convey different things to your recipient, dependent upon, also your sentiment. So I am using the Where Nature Meets Home stencil. This is a scene stencil. I love this. Altenew is generous enough to give me a little bit of a discount code for their Stencil Heart section. So I do have a 15% off discount code for, like I said, the Stencil Art section, which is Kelly, S as in Sam, A as in Adam, Kelly SA. And that is good the July 27th through the 28th, midnight on the 28th. And so I'll link that below if you would like to check that out after the video. But basically, I went through and chose some colors. Now, Altenew makes this super, super easy because they have color families that come in 4 colors. So they have a light medium, a dark medium, and then a dark. And this makes it super easy to be able to kind of switch it up how we're applying the color and the different look that we can get. I also went through, I don't know if you know this, but Altenew has weekly sales all of the time. And a lot of the color families that I'm using today are actually on sale for their weekly sale, which is through, I think, August 2nd. So if you haven't checked that out, I would recommend it. The first stencil gives us the roof, the shutters and the door, and then kind of like these flowery bits. When I originally saw this stencil, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do one for every season. Like, I'm going to do a summer, spring, winter, fall, like to show all the different ways that you could use this, because I could see right away how versatile it was. But I didn't want to overwhelm you with a bunch of ideas. So I decided that I would just do kind of more of like a day morning scene, how open and bright that is, and then more of an evening night scene. So you could see the difference and what you can get with just one stencil just by switching up your colors. So you'll notice as I'm going through here and stenciling that I am using multiple colors with my stenciling. This is true for me no matter what kind of color family I'm using. Like I said, Altenew does make it super easy. But I like a lot of color variation. And in order to have a lot of color variation, you do have to use different colors or different depth of color, like how you apply it. So for my trees, I went in with a lighter brown. That color family, the lightest one is actually Vanilla Cream, which I did not use, but is a very pretty color. And then for the greens, I wanted to make them kind of more interesting. You guys know I like a lot of color variation. So I went with a yellow green, and then I went with more of like a blue green. And I'm using that on the details. This kind of stencil almost feels like hand painterly, and you'll see more toward the end that I have a little bit of a trick that I like to use to make it feel more so that way, and to kind of help distinguish my card from other people's cards, even though we're all using this beautiful stencil that, it makes it really easy to do a lot of like detail work. But I forgot, those big brushes are on sale too. There's a 4-pack on sale. I think I'm going to end up getting some. But I did forget about that. That's also included in the sale. But anyway, so for this yellow-green combination, I am making it so the hill where the house is sitting, isn't this like, it just reminds me of like a little, I don't know, like a little fairy house or like a little cottage in the woods. Like, wouldn't that just be amazing? I think that would be fantastic to have like a little cottage in the woods where we just got away from everything. But I recently did that. So I can't be like too envious of that. Anyway, when I'm applying the ink, I'm making sure that I leave the top of the hill nice and light, and then I'm adding the shading kind of inside from the left and the right-hand side, as well as a little bit under, like where those kind of flower feeling areas are going to be. So that way it's adding a little bit more depth and dimension, and it's not looking like our little forest floor is like very one note. For this one, you'll notice that I did use all four colors, which typically I'm not. I'm using all four colors in this one because I needed just that little bit of darkness on the outside edge. So for the trees, I wanted to do more of like a blue-green so that I would have that color variation that we talked about. So this stencil does the hill area and then it does two of the trees. So I'm doing the three lightest colors for this particular color combination, which is what is that called? Silver? Wait, hold on. Silver sage. No. No, this is actually the three darkest colors. I apologize. This is the three darkest colors because the lightest one is so light, but I am being very light-handed with the darkest color to create kind of like some shadows up there. This is where I'm going to bring in the silver sage for the one that sits on top. And for this one, I am going to use the lightest color. So that way it looks like the other two trees are in the background, and then the other ones will be in the foreground. So that's where, I'm sorry, that's where I got confused. Because I was like, no, I know I did some lighter and some darker. I just had them flip-flopped around. So this is just how you can kind of use your color palette to make sure that you are getting more out of what you have, is by switching up the colors in general, like within the same color family. I'm not explaining this well. Within the same color family. So I'm using like the light mid-tone and the dark mid-tone, and then the light mid-tone, dark mid-tone, and then the darkest to help create kind of some different color variation. So this one, because we're keeping everything nice and light, it is going to help the whole overall look of the card to be kind of more open and springy and bright and give more of a morning type feel, because everything is nice and light with this one. So now then doing the bottom portion of it, I am going to bring in some of that blue-green into the bottom to break up some of that kind of yellow-green that we have been, like, that is the majority of the bottom. So for this one kind of down here at the bottom, I'm doing the same thing where it's kind of breaking it up to do those different color variations. Now you will notice kind of right along the middle here, there are some lines, and those lines are actually going to add some details to the trees. So for that, again, remember how we talked about earlier in the video, how I said I have a way to kind of add a little bit more detail. So I will be doing that to add more detail to those trees, but the stencil already gives you some kind of down a little bit lower in the trees. And then for those, I'm just going to go ahead and use the same color family. I'm just going to use the darkest color, which in this one I think is the milk chocolate, to just put those in so that you have those darker bits of details. And then that's basically this whole stencil here. And already we're looking fantastic. For the house, I wanted the house to be white, but white doesn't mean no shading at all. So I am using the Morning Frost and a bigger brush to just add a little bit of that. And then this one also includes just the last little bits of details in the grasses. For this one, I am using the lightest color, which is the aloe vera. And I'm not going to do really anything else with that. I'm not going to do too much else. I'm happy with the way it looks. Now you could leave it this way, or this last and final stencil is the one that gives you the sky with the kind of cloud accent. And it also gives you some of the, I think, the details on the house. So here I'm going in and I'm using very bright blues. So this is Arctic, Caribbean sky, and Persian blue. I'm doing an all over with the Arctic, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of shading kind of here and there with the Caribbean sky and the Persian blue to really make that blue pop. So that we can see the cloud. If you didn't want to see the cloud, you could just do kind of like a very light blue, but in order to be able to see the cloud well, we do have to have some contrast. Again, we don't want to go too dark. Our goal is to make this kind of very open and breathable, and we're going to have these beautiful little flowers and like our little teeny tiny cottage, and like so stinking cute, this one. So then once we're done with this one, this is the last little bit that we'll do with the darkest color. Once we're done with that, then this scene is done. So I'm super happy with the way it looks, like a fairy tale, like a little illustration. I love that. Now going forward for the next card, the nighttime or the evening card, I am going to change up some things, and that is going to be using darker colors. Now, for some of these color families, I'm adding in even darker colors, like this raspberry sunset, to really darken up that velvet. You might also notice that I masked off the areas of the house. This is actually the shutter and the door. What I really wanted to mask off was the windows. So I will eventually fix this later on in the card. But I wanted the windows to look like they were lighting up. So now I'm changing the angle in which I'm adding the darker color. I'm adding the darker color kind of like down into the bottom left, so that way I will have a lighter, like a highlight on top of the roof of the house, as well as to the right of the flowers, where like maybe the moon is kind of casting some light. I didn't put a moon in there, but you get it. There's a invisible moon that's off the page. So since we have seen this before, once we're done here, I am going to speed this up a little bit, and I'll just kind of point out the differences as they kind of pop up. So one of the things you'll notice here with the trees, I did add in, again, a darker color. I'm using that lava rock, which is like a warm gray. Another good color would also be like an espresso. It's just going to be a little bit darker and also a little bit cooler. So in the evening, we have typically, like in the evening, nighttime, there are cooler colors, which means that they're more on the blue side of things. So even though you see me like adding more direct color of the lava rock, I'm kind of giving everything like a very light once over. And then for the hill, whereas before we were trying to leave everything kind of nice and light and open, I'm going to be much heavier handed. Even though I'm using the same greens, they'll feel different because I'm using the darker end of the spectrum of this color family, but also I'm using more of it. So that oak moss color, I'm using a lot more of that in the corners, kind of leaving that center the lightest part, but definitely adding more of those darker colors. Then moving on to the next one for the whole hill, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not using the aloe vera at all. We're going right in with the light mid-tone as our lightest color, and then shading it out. So one of the things you'll notice right away when you are seeing the colors come together is that in the nighttime or the evening, there's not as much detail. And that is because there's not as much light to see all of that detail. So it has kind of more of a overall shape versus being able to see all of the little detail work. So when we're doing like the hill, we're not going to see as much color variation in between the different layers that we do in the like morning time, because it is darker, it is in shadow, it is a little bit cooler. So those elements are just not going to be as differentiated. Here again, I'm now masking the correct windows, and then I'm going to go in and do the same thing that we did before. This time I'm going to be heavier handed on the, what is it, forest fern? I always want to say fern forest. Forest fern, and then I'm also going to add in an evergreen, which is another green from a different color family to give it an even darker look. Now you could go, I almost always, like with things like this, end up having to go back and do a second layer. I did not do that this time, so it would be more of like a evening kind of feel versus like pitch black night. But if you wanted to have like the most drama, you have to have the most contrast. So you could go darker than what I did here to really have that pop of contrast and make the whole scene kind of sing. Like I said, if I had was going for that look, I would have gone back in and probably done another layer. If you want that look, go darker than you think that you need to. So if you are feeling like, hey, oh here, I cleaned the stencil and then I went back in with the yellow for the window, so it's gonna look like the windows are kind of lit up. And then for this one here, which is the sky color, instead of doing the Arctic, Caribbean sky, and Persian blue, I am doing the, what is that? Cloudy sky, nimbus, dark night. What's the lightest color of that one? I can't remember. But anyway, I'm using those. I'm using the dark ones. And I am being pretty heavy-handed with them. I am using the darker colors kind of more behind the trees and behind the cloud to make sure, again, just like we did with the first card, we want to have enough contrast around the cloud for it to really pop. And in this case, because it is a night sky, it will give us quite a bit of contrast, which will be really nice. So yeah, so if you are like trying to get the most visual pop, for sure, be heavy-handed with your darks. Here I've removed that mask for the house, and I am doing the same thing. I want it to read as white, but remember it's at night, so we have to be darker with our shadows. So instead of using morning frost, I'm using evening gray. And then did the oak moss for the darkest bits instead of using the aloe vera like we did in the first one. In order to create our stars, I am using the titanium white gouache from Altenew. I am going to mask off my little house, and then I'm just going to lay a piece of scrap cardstock down at the bottom here to cover up. This stencil, I should say, actually does have a 6th stencil, and that allows you to put snow into the scene if you would like to. So that was one of the reasons why I was kind of leaning toward that, like 4 seasons. I think that would be really beautiful. So maybe I'll have to revisit this as we get closer to the colder weather. So here's how they look without any of the added detail, and they are beautiful. But you guys know me, I love the detail work, and I really enjoy making it kind of look different than everybody else's. This makes it look a little bit more like hand painted. And so I'm going to use my acrylic markers from Altenew. I used volume 1 and volume 2. I'm using 2 different colors of browns to add some detail into the trees. But again, just like we talked about, most of the detail is going to be in the daytime. I am going to add some into the nighttime scene, but a lot of what we'll be able to see, like as far as, you know, kind of differentiating kind of like the leaves or adding in more interest into the grasses or the flowers, is going to be a daytime thing. So I did the woodwork there. I also went back in where I had originally done the shutters yellow. Yeah, or I think I did them red on that one. I went back with the brown marker and got them. Then for these areas that look like flowers, but there's no real, what's the word that I want? It's not really a strong edge. That's not the word that I want. I cannot think of the word that I want. But anyway, it's not defined. That's it. You can't really see a defined flower shape. I'm just going to give the illusion of more flowers by doing first a yellow dot for some centers. Then I went in with a kind of a mid-tone red. What was that? Crimson, I think. No, coral sunset, and did some dots. And then I'm going to add even more interest by going in with a blush, so that there are like 3 different colors there. For the greenery, again, I'm going to add more interest, and this is really easy to do because of the way that the stencil is drawn, where it is kind of like that painterly look. So I'm just really going in, doing little dots and dashes of green to kind of add more interest to the grassy areas that are already there. And then I'm doing that with swamp green. Is that what it's called? No, C4. No. Shadow Creek, Shadow Creek, and Sea Forest, and then Forest Fern. Also, I'm going to do kind of like the trees along the, like the bush line there, and then something of interest here with the grasses that are kind of coming up at the bottom of the flowers. Let me come back to that. Here up in the trees, I am using forest fern, and I'm also using, what is that? Pine green. So to add some interest there. Here, down here, you'll see I'm using these, and it is a little bit, it's lighter than the stencil part. So I'm using the stencil part almost as like a shadow. For the night scene, because it is much lighter, I am then using the marker as the highlight. So in one area, like on one card, it becomes the shadow because it is darker, but on the night card, it becomes the highlight because it's so much lighter. And I didn't add as much to the grasses because you wouldn't see that much detail. Same thing with the trees. I added a little bit in the lightest areas where the light would catch, but other than that, I didn't add, any more detail or as much work in the leaves or anything like that because you wouldn't see it in the evening time. Like that twilight hour, you would not see as much detail. I did add a little bit more darkness to the trees. But you can see they have, different amounts of detail, but they look very different from one another. We use the same color families, just the different hues, right? Darker or lighter. And we kind of changed up how we added our detail work. So for the sentiments, I cut the shadow out of vellum and then the sentiments out of colored cardstock. I did add a little bit of shimmer. You have to be careful though, because Altenew dye inks are exactly that. They're dye based, so you can reactivate them. And then I did add just a little bit of white highlights with my gel pen. And then here is a final look at both cards. I think that they came out so cute. I feel like they feel totally different. You guys will have to tell me in the comments if you think they're giving off two different moods. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Please don't forget to check out that sale code, 15% off, Kelly SA. It's linked below. And thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate it. And I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.